Old man, don't come so early again. You're embarrassing me. Pack up your things and leave now. You look bad because you do bad work. Don't drag me into this.
The first thing I heard that Monday morning wasn't the jammed printer coughing up its usual paper tantrum. It was Gavin Mercer's voice slicing through the office like a cheap knife. "You're making me look bad, Blake," he announced loudly, as if he'd been waiting all weekend to humiliate someone. I looked up from the machine, still holding the half-crumpled sheet, and saw my new boss standing there with that smug grin that made you want to check if his mirror ever told him the truth. People stopped typing. Chairs froze mid-roll. Gavin lifted his chin, pointed straight at me, and declared, "Pack your things and get out. You show up too early. Makes the rest of us look incompetent." For a second, I didn't move. 15 years of running this building before sunrise quietly, consistently, invisibly compressed into the space between one heartbeat and the next. My chest tightened, not with shock, but with that familiar, choking blend of insult and restraint. The kind you swallow because dignity is heavier than anger. Before I go on, tell me, where are you listening from right now? I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And hey, a tiny confession, while we're being honest, about 95% of you are listening without subscribing, which is a little heartbreaking. But I'll forgive you. Hit subscribe now so you never miss the next twist, the next downfall, or the next perfectly timed office karma, because trust me, things are just getting good. I stood there with the jammed page still in my hands, feeling every pair of eyes and stratagem dynamics burn into my back. I'd spent a decade and a half keeping this place breathing, unlocking doors at dawn, warming the servers, prepping the dashboards, brewing the coffee no one ever said thank you for. And now I was being dismissed like the office ghost everyone forgot they relied on. But Gavin didn't know that. He didn't know anything. Really not about the systems, not about the routines, not about the 1,000 small tasks that made his leadership look smooth. He thought he was flexing authority. He thought he'd won something. I finally looked up and met his eyes. Something inside me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet thread breaking after being pulled too tight for too long. My heartbeat steadied, my breathing leveled, and slowly, deliberately. I let a small smile curl at the corner of my mouth, a smile he mistook for obedience. But it wasn't obedience. It was the first tremor of a shift he couldn't see, the kind that starts at the foundation before the walls begin to crack. He had no idea he'd just pulled out the only support beam holding his little kingdom upright, and I didn't have to say a word. The collapse would speak for itself. I kept my face perfectly still as the room stared at me. But inside, the air felt strangely lighter, as if someone had finally loosened a too-tight collar I'd worn for years, without a word. I turned back to my desk and began packing. Exactly as instructed, I slipped my charger into my bag, placed my old leather notebook on top, and picked up the small black USB labeled nothing at all, though anyone who understood our systems would have recognized it as the only thing standing between order and utter organizational collapse. It contained the 6:45 a.m. checklist Gavin depended on every morning without realizing it had a creator. He assumed the gods of automation loved him personally. Cute. The office stayed strangely quiet as I moved, but a different kind of quiet, not respectful, not sympathetic, just that collective stiffening people do when they sense the floor shifting but don't know where to step. I didn't bother explaining. I didn't need to. In 15 years. I'd learned that truth had a talent for revealing itself without my help. By the time I walked out the door at 6:51, something in the building felt off, not to me, but to everyone else, though it took them a few minutes to understand why. I didn't hear it directly, but messages always travel fast in a building like stratagem dynamics. First came the confused murmurs, "Why are the hallway lights still on standby mode? Why's the HVAC not running?" Then, the sharper notes, "Is the dashboard still down? Who forgot to start the system?" For the first time in a decade and a half, the office looked exactly like what it was at that hour, a dormant, unprepared shell with all the charm of an abandoned warehouse. The coffee machine didn't hum, the server lights didn't pulse, and the vendor gateway didn't flicker awake for the early shipments. All the little miracles people assumed happened magically at dawn were suddenly gone. I strolled back in at 9 o'clock sharp, carrying the same calm expression one might wear after a light morning stretch. No one noticed at first. They were too busy trying to figure out why the building felt colder, slower, heavier. But I noticed the whispers sharpening, turning from mild confusion to unease. Then came the moment I'd been expecting, though even I couldn't have scripted it this perfectly. A young operations manager, new enough to still believe everything runs on polite requests and team synergy, approached Gavin with a nervous clipboard in hand. Who's going to activate the vendor system at 7? He asked. Gavin blinked at him, annoyed and confused in equal measure. The what? That single reply traveled across the room like a quiet earthquake, and I stood there, arranging my pens, pretending not to notice the chaos beginning its first gentle crack. The system wasn't failing. It was simply following orders just like I was. If you are just watching for fun, do not comment. This section is for serious people. I walked through the front doors at 9:00 a.m. exactly, the way a man follows a doctor's order he never asked for. The lobby lights flickered awake too slowly. The air felt oddly stale, and the server room's usual early morning hum was missing like a skipped heartbeat. None of it surprised me, but the looks on everyone else's faces, that was the real morning entertainment. People scurried around with half-booted laptops, coffee mugs gripped like flotation devices, and that wide-eyed panic only office workers get when a routine they never understood suddenly vanishes. By the time I reached my desk, the tremors had already hit the strategic wing. Someone from upstairs practically sprinted down the hall, whisper shouting into their phone. It's not here. The digest isn't here. I pretended not to hear, powering on my computer as calmly as a man selecting a playlist. The digest, 7:10 a.m. The golden document they believed materialized from the heavens was conspicuously, catastrophically absent, and the absence was loud. Voices echoed down the corridor, doors slammed, and the kind of frantic typing that leads nowhere filled the air. A minute later, Gavin stormed past with the energy of a man realizing he'd accidentally set fire to his own shoes. He kicked open the conference room door, demanding answers. Interns were accused first, then IT, then an unlucky project manager who had the misfortune of carrying a stack of unrelated folders. Gavin's voice carried through the glass walls. How hard is it to keep one file updated? Who is responsible for this? The irony almost made me laugh. I waited until the tension was thick enough to taste before standing up and walking past the conference room window. Gavin caught sight of me like a drowning man spotting a buoy. He rushed out, red-faced, waving his hand. Anderson, why wasn't the digest sent? We needed it before the CEO arrived. I let a quiet, harmless smile tug at my mouth, the polite kind your grandmother might wear while deciding if she should scold you or pray for you. I'm only following your instructions, I said softly. 9:00 start time. Remember, if silence could slap someone. That moment did it for me. Inside the room, the CEO sat at the head of the table staring at a blank monitor where the digest should have been displayed. He tapped the surface once, sharp and impatient. That file was his opening move for every major meeting. Without it, the whole agenda floated uselessly in the air. And today, there was nothing. The meeting. The flow. The authority all stalled out because one invisible task, one quiet, pre-dawn ritual, was no longer performed. And while everyone else panicked, I simply walked back to my desk, calm, steady, watching the cracks spread exactly where they were meant to. There was something in the back that no one expected. The strange thing about silence is how quickly it turns into confession. By mid-morning, Stratagem Dynamics was already whispering its secrets, and none of them were flattering. I sat at my desk with a fresh cup of coffee, my first on-schedule cup in 15 years, and watched the office unravel with all the detachment of a man observing his own retirement party from across the street. No announcements, no alarms, just the slow reveal of everything I had once held together with muscle memory and too much loyalty. The first crack appeared in IT. Someone shouted across the hallway, "Why didn't the servers warm up before 8?" A tense pause followed. Then another voice. Who usually triggers that, the hidden question behind every hidden task? I took a long sip of coffee. It tasted suspiciously like freedom. A few minutes later, the data team chimed in. Their Slack channel, normally quiet at this hour, burst alive with pings. Backup test failed. Scheduler didn't execute. Does anyone know the manual override path? Their panic scrolled across the monitors like stock market crashes, and none of them realized they were reading the consequences of a single missing habit, the one I performed at 6:30 every morning without ever writing it down. Then legal got involved, which is always when you know a building is truly in trouble. Someone from compliance hustled down the hall, holding a glowing tablet like it was radioactive. Why wasn't the pre-review system heated, she demanded. It's stuck in overnight mode. Overnight mode, cute term for nobody turned the ignition key. Meanwhile, Gavin was bouncing between departments like a malfunctioning screensaver. Every few minutes, I'd hear his voice drifting through the corridor. Who used to do this? Was it automated? Why isn't there documentation? Each question sounded like a man digging deeper into sand, hoping to find concrete, and I stayed exactly where I was sitting at my desk, stirring my coffee with the kind of serenity that drives insecure managers insane. My phone buzzed with message after message, but I didn't rush to answer. Not this time, not anymore. By late morning, the fallout had spread to operations. Slack threads went offbeat, emails looped, timestamps didn't match, and 2 separate teams complained that the vendor reports looked wrong. They weren't wrong, they were simply untouched by the human being who'd spent 15 years correcting them before anyone else woke up. Then came the twist. Subtle but lethal. A single error alert popped up on the shared system, a tiny compliance flag that I usually fixed at 6:58 a.m. with 3 keystrokes and 1 sigh, harmless when caught early, annoying but fixable by 7. But today, left alone until almost 11, it ballooned into a full red warning flashing across the federal dashboard, a potential breach. The system called it, the entire floor froze, someone whispered. How did this get past our early check? And in the quiet that followed, I took another sip of coffee. For once, the building was finally learning what I already knew. Invisible work isn't invisible because it's small. It's invisible because people forget to look until the lights go out by early afternoon. The air inside Stratagem Dynamics felt different. Tight. Unsettled, like someone had turned down the oxygen without warning. People were still scrambling to fix the morning's mess, but something deeper was shifting beneath all the noise. You could see it in the way conversations dropped when I walked by, or how managers huddled in corners whispering urgently into their phones. It wasn't panic yet, not officially, but it was close enough that you could smell the fear trying to hide behind every polite smile. The first real crack came at 1:23 p.m. When Gavin's phone rang loud enough to echo through half the floor, he stepped into the hallway, trying to sound important as he answered, but even from my desk I could hear the tension in his voice. Yes. This is Gavin Mercer. Yes, we received your message. His tone dropped an octave. The vendor reconciliation sheet. What about it? Silence, then a strained. We're working on that. Everyone nearby pretended not to listen. I didn't bother pretending. When he finally hung up, his face looked a shade paler than the overhead LEDs. He marched straight to the operations bay, voice sharp enough to slice open drywall. Where is the updated vendor comparison? Why wasn't it sent to Westbridge Holdings this morning? No one answered. They didn't need to. He already knew. Still, he tried to salvage anything. I heard him on another call minutes later, jaw clenched so hard his words came out clipped. It was a system issue, probably a syncing delay. We'll have it resolved immediately. The reply was so loud he had to hold the phone away from his ear. System issue. Your 51-year-old operations architect has prevented system issues for 15 years straight. It was the kind of sentence that should have been carved into marble. From where I sat, calmly organizing my inbox, I could practically feel the blood drain from Gavin's face. His breathing turned fast and shallow. He tried to regain control with corporate jargon alignment, workflow adjustments, temporary dependency interruption, but the partner wasn't buying it. They never do when a missing document costs them millions in forecasting errors. Then came the real hit. We'll need documentation proving Anderson Blake is no longer responsible for these deliverables. The partner said coldly, Our board requires a formal explanation before our audit meeting tonight. The phone went silent. Not a technical glitch, just the sound of a man who had run out of lies, he finally muttered. Of course, we'll provide that. When he hung up again, he didn't move. For a full 10 seconds, he stood frozen in the middle of the walkway, as if hoping the carpet might swallow him whole. The fear was no longer subtle. It was sitting openly on his shoulders, pressing down hard. Only then did he look at me, really look at me with a mixture of suspicion, dread, and something dangerously close to regret, and I just kept typing, calm as ever. The crisis hadn't arrived. It had simply taken its first breath. If you watch until the end, you will understand what everyone else missed. By the time the noon strategy meeting rolled around, I could already sense the unraveling. The halls were restless, the whispers sharper, and every department looked like it had aged 5 years since breakfast. I slipped into the room quietly, taking my usual seat near the back wall, far enough to observe but close enough to savor what was about to happen. Gavin stood at the head of the table, straightening his tie for the 4th time as executives filed in with tense expressions and empty folders, because the one folder they truly needed didn't exist today. Normally, the morning metrics package would have been neatly printed, tabbed, and placed in front of each leader by 7:30 a.m., a document that took me 40 minutes every dawn and took them 5 minutes to pretend they understood. Today, the table was bare, naked, even, and so was Gavin's confidence. He clicked to the first slide of his presentation, trying to maintain composure, but the cracks showed immediately. The Excel sheet opened with a sluggish groan, half the formulas broken, the other half referencing empty cells. He cleared his throat, scrolled up, scrolled down, scrolled back up as if movement alone could summon missing numbers. Then he started talking. We're trying to. So, as you can see, projected, Q4 performances, hold on just a second. This isn't every stammer echoed through the conference room like a slow leak in a sinking ship. The CFO, a man famous for facial expressions carved from granite, finally leaned forward. Where's the metrics package? He asked flatly. Gavin swallowed. It's delayed, the CFO repeated. Colder this time, it has never been delayed in 15 years. Silence spread across the table like spilled ink. Eyes drifted toward me for the briefest second, just long enough to make Gavin sweat harder. He tugged his collar, clicking random cells on the spreadsheet as if praying one of them might magically populate. The COO crossed her arms. Who was responsible for preparing it today? Gavin stiffened. Well, technically, Anderson was the one who told Mr. Blake he was no longer needed. The CFO cut in. It was the kind of question that doesn't request an answer so much as demand a confession. Gavin hesitated 3 excruciating seconds of hesitation before muttering. I let him go. Why? The CEO asked quietly. Gavin inhaled shakily. So he wouldn't make me look bad. The room froze, not a single breath. Not a single tap of a keyboard, not even the hum of the projector seemed willing to break the silence that followed. It was the sound of every executive simultaneously realizing that the man leading the meeting had just admitted out loud that he fired the only person holding the building together. And just like that, Gavin's downfall officially began. They called the emergency meeting at 2:15 p.m., and the moment the message hit my inbox, I knew the storm had finally matured into something solid. Not panic, not suspicion, consequence, real, measurable consequence. I walked into the executive conference room with the slow, steady calm of someone who had nothing left to prove. Gavin, on the other hand, looked like a man bracing for impact he still didn't fully understand. The CEO gestured toward an empty seat. Anderson, thank you for joining. We need clarification on several operational gaps. Operational gaps. That was a polite way of saying, explain why the building died the second you stopped touching it. I nodded once, reached into my bag, and placed the old gray notebook onto the table. It was unremarkable on the outside, scuffed leather, faded corners, but the moment it touched the surface, the room shifted. I opened it to the first page, the one dated March 2009, and slid it forward. These, I said quietly, are the morning tasks I've been maintaining for the past 15 years, 26 in total, all completed before 7 o'clock. A hush swept the room. Executives leaned closer, reading line after line. Server ignition at 6:10, backup testing at 6:25, compliance warm-up at 6:38, vendor normalization at 6:52, interdepartmental data sync at 6:57, task after task, entry after entry, 15 years of invisible infrastructure laid bare in black ink. The COO let out a slow exhale. The VP of Compliance rubbed her temples. The CEO stopped blinking altogether. Even the normally stoic chairman leaned forward, gripping his pen like it might escape. Then Gavin's voice cracked through the silence. All of that, he did all of that alone. His tone was a mixture of disbelief and fear, like he was seeing a ghost he didn't know he'd been living with. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The notebook spoke for itself. That's when the CFO finally looked up, expression carved from steel. No, he said evenly. Not just that. Anderson has personally kept us out of 54 audit escalations. He's caught regulatory errors before they became federal problems. He's stabilized vendor mismatches, prevented 3 data desync catastrophes, and detected 2 compliance anomalies that could have cost us millions. The CFO turned his gaze on Gavin, eyes cold and unmistakably sharp, and you destroyed all of that in 3 days. Silence hit the room like a dropped stone. Gavin's face turned the color of copier paper. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hands trembled against the table, and for the first time since he swaggered into the company. I saw the truth flicker in his eyes. He finally understood the magnitude of what he'd undone. Not just a package, not just a checklist, a foundation, and it was gone because of one careless order. The room was still vibrating from the weight of my notebook when the CEO finally turned toward me, fingers steepled, eyes sharp. "Anderson," he said, "walk us through one thing. Why did none of the morning tasks occur today?" I took a slow breath, letting the silence settle before I answered. It wasn't dramatic, it was deliberate, controlled, the kind of calm that makes people lean in because they know something important is coming. "Simple," I said. I followed direct instruction. A ripple ran through the room. Even Gavin lifted his head, eyes wide, as if he couldn't quite believe I had just said that out loud. I folded my hands neatly on the table, keeping my tone soft, almost conversational like I was reading a breakfast menu last week. Gavin told me to stop arriving early. He said 9 o'clock would better support cultural alignment. So, I arrived at 9. A few muffled coughs escaped the executives. The VP of Ops covered her mouth to hide a laugh, but the CEO didn't move. He simply leaned back, studying me with a cold, inquisitive patience. "Do you have proof of that?" he asked. I nodded once. Of course. I reached into my folder and slid out a printed email, placing it in the center of the table. The subject line glared up at them like a neon sign. "Clarity Anderson, starting next week. Please begin at 9 o'clock a.m. to maintain cultural consistency. Gavin Mercer." The CEO picked it up. The CFO tilted his head. The chairman exhaled through his nose, slow and heavy, like a man beginning to understand just how far the dominoes had already fallen. Around the table, reactions bounced silently between disbelief and resignation. One executive muttered under their breath, "Unbelievable." Another simply shook her head, staring at Gavin like he'd personally unplugged the life support on the company. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the CEO lowered the paper. "Gavin," he said, voice quiet but razor sharp. "Is this accurate?" Gavin tried to speak, but the words tangled together like wires in a burning wall. I meant, it was supposed to be." He swallowed hard. "It wasn't meant literally." The COO raised an eyebrow. "Emails are literal," the legal director chimed in, "especially when they're directives." Gavin opened his mouth again, but nothing coherent came out. His hands were shaking. Sweat dotted his collar. Watching him unravel would have been satisfying if it weren't so pathetic. The chairman finally spoke, his voice calm and devastating. "Gavin," he said, "did you really dismiss the man who has held up our operational foundation for 15 years? The question landed like a hammer. The entire room went silent, not polite silence, but the kind that comes just before a verdict is delivered. Gavin's eyes darted toward me, pleading, as if hoping I might rescue him. I didn't. I simply met his gaze with the same polite, steady expression I'd worn since the moment he told me to pack my things. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth was loud enough. The silence left hanging in the room after the chairman's question didn't fade. It thickened. You could almost feel it settling on Gavin's shoulders like wet cement, heavy and unforgiving. When the CEO finally spoke, his voice was steady, measured, but there was no warmth in it. "Gavin Mercer," he said, "you are suspended effective immediately." The words seemed to hit Gavin twice, first in the face, then somewhere deeper, like they'd punched a hole straight through his confidence. His knees buckled slightly as HR and legal stepped forward. They didn't raise their voices or make a scene. They simply did what professionals do when consequences arrive. HR asked for his badge. Legal asked for his digital access keys. The chairman requested his administrative credentials. Gavin looked around the table as if hoping someone might intervene, but no one did. The executives who had tolerated his showmanship a week ago now watched with a kind of clinical detachment, like surgeons observing an operation they already knew the outcome of. "Please," he stammered, voice cracking. I just didn't want him making me look bad, that's all. I didn't mean to." The CEO cut him off with a calm that was almost cruel in its precision. "You made yourself look bad. Gavin, Anderson hasn't done a thing to you. He only followed your instructions." The blow landed harder than any shouting could. Gavin's face crumpled, the kind of expression a person makes when they finally realize there's no one else left to blame. He tried again. Weaker this time. I just needed to show leadership. The CFO answered this time, cold as midwinter steel. Leadership isn't removing the foundation and expecting the building to stand. You fired the one person holding your department together. I didn't move. I didn't gloat. I didn't so much as blink. Watching him fall apart didn't bring satisfaction. It simply felt inevitable, like gravity reclaiming something that had been foolishly thrown upward. HR gently directed him toward the door. His footsteps dragged every few paces. He turned, as if waiting for someone to call him back. No one did, the moment the door closed behind him. The room exhaled. Then all eyes shifted to me. The CEO leaned forward, elbows on the table, tone firm but no longer sharp. "Anderson," he said, "we need you to stabilize the system immediately. Temporarily. At least," the chairman nodded, "you know the infrastructure better than anyone alive." There was no applause, no triumphant music, just a recognition of necessity, a quiet acknowledgement that the system hadn't collapsed because of revenge. It collapsed simply because I stepped back. I met their eyes one by one and gave a small nod. Not out of pride, but out of inevitability. The building needed its architect again, the moment the board dismissed Gavin. The room shifted from tension to urgency. I didn't need instructions. I simply walked to the command terminal and logged in with my still active credentials. The system greeted me like an old friend abandoned for a day too long. I rolled up my sleeves, navigated through layers of failing processes, and began reversing the chaos server resets, compliance thawing, vendor normalization, data sync reconstruction. Muscle memory took over. 17 minutes later. The final green indicator lit up. The dashboards pulsed back to life. The legal platform reconnected. Even the HVAC system whispered its familiar hum through the vents. For the first time since sunrise. Stratagem Dynamics exhaled. A wave of relief washed across the room. Executives leaned back in their chairs. Someone actually applauded softly before catching themselves. And then the CEO stepped toward me, slow, measured, but different this time. No superiority, no distance, just sincerity. "Anderson," he said quietly, "we owe you an apology and a new role." I didn't say anything. I just waited. "You've been the backbone of this company without the title. We'd like to correct that. Effective immediately. We're appointing you as Director of Operational Integrity." The words hung in the air, solid, unmistakable, nothing like the condescending command Gavin had thrown at me days earlier. I nodded, not out of pride, but out of the deep, steady relief of finally being seen. As I stepped out of the conference room, a flicker of movement caught my eye, down the hall. Gavin was packing his things into the same kind of cardboard box he once told me to use. His posture was smaller, his steps slower, his face hollowed by a truth he hadn't wanted to learn. You can't fire the foundation and expect the building to stand. And I walked past him without a word because sometimes justice doesn't need a victory lap. It just needs the right moment to land. In the end, I realized something simple but powerful. Quiet work still counts, even when no one notices until the day it's gone. If you've ever held everything together in silence, I hope this story reminds you that your value doesn't disappear just because someone fails to see it. And before you go, tell me, where are you listening from today? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps more people find the justice they've been waiting to hear.